There we go. That should be better. Yes, we are good. We are Gucci. Okay, so hey everyone, this is Mitch here, your logical libertarian, and today we're going to be talking about something that I actually really like, and something I feel kind of strongly about when it comes to law and quite a few other things. It is a thought that I've had, and I have a relative process to how I look at law and just the practice of government and interpersonal interaction in general. Um, but today we're going to be looking at someone who I really used to really look up to more when I was younger and more of an anarchist. Um, when I was really trying to find myself as a libertarian, and someone I still have a lot of respect for and still admire, but not as much, especially because I've seen this person not be as, let's say, researched and thought out as they should be. I don't look up to them as much as I used to, but still have a lot of respect. And we're going to discuss UPB from Stefan Molyneux. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with the idea of objective morality. I actually kind of agree with both Stefan Molyneux as well as Matt Delahunty when it comes to their concepts. However, I wanted to go over some of the issues that are brought up in this kind of little, I guess you'd say, commercial for his book on it, about UPB and just kind of the basic thought process going into it, and bring up my own ideas as well. So we're going to go take a look at the video right now. We're going to watch and pause as we respond. So here we go. Let's listen.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Stefan Molyneux. I hope that you're ready for your daily argument. Today we're going to be talking about ethics, the most important work I think that I've done as a philosopher, and I believe the most important work that can be done in philosophy. We're going to talk about my theory of ethics called universally preferable behavior. It's going to be a very brief introduction. If you want more, and I really hope that you do, then please check out my free book, Universally Preferable Behavior, a rational proof of secular ethics, that is available at freedomainradio.com/free. So let's dive in, shall we? The question, I guess, is first, why? Why bother with a system of ethics? Well, I guess you really can't help but notice these days that since the fall of Christianity as a central ethos or set of virtues for Western civilization, well, we've been just a little bit lost and adrift, and in some ways I think we're now circling the drain. And so the problem I've had with a lot of atheists and secularists is what they've done is they kind of ripped the roof off the church during the hailstorm of internecine warfare that characterizes most of human history. They tore down the church, drove people out of the church, but gave them no new place to shelter themselves. And so now people are just kind of lost and wandering and scared. They don't have a community. They don't have a central system of belief. And, well, let's just say the West has become pretty damn easy pickings. So whether you can go back and resurrect the Greco-Roman and Christian worldview, I guess that's a possibility. It's not particularly a strong possibility for empirical rational philosophy, so I wanted to work on a system of ethics that would prove virtue, that would prove morality, that would crack the Humean distinction between the ought and the is. You know, like you can't get an ought from an is. The ought generally has come from divine commandments, or failing that has come from the secular power of the state to punish people who don't conform to legal norms. Neither of those are philosophical fundamentally, so I worked very hard on this. I was very informed by Aristotle's old dictum that says, hey, by all means, work on a system of ethics, more power to you. But if you end up with a system of ethics wherein, rape, theft, assault, and murder, the big four, are somehow good, well, then you've made a wrong turn at Albuquerque somewhere. You've gone in the wrong direction.
All right, so we'll pause it right there. Kind of let Stefan talk a bit for a few minutes. So one thing I wanted to really unpack first was the first statement that really didn't upset me, but I really don't disagree with, is a concept that with getting away from being religious, with becoming more secular, the idea that the West, preferably, obviously, like Western Europe, like the UK, Canada, America, and so on and so forth, have become lost in regards to ethics, with kind of this move, this distancing from Christianity and distancing from being very religious, moving more towards deism, then eventually atheism, or sort of a secularism, at least, even if they are religious. I don't agree that it's really led to us being ethically lost. I think it's actually part of our ethical rebirth and us becoming more ethical, especially if you look from Enlightenment era, around the Revolution for the United States, the Revolutionary War, going forward. I'd say that we've actually become a long way, especially when it comes to righting some of the wrongs that the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, scripturally really didn't fucking have a clue on, and that comes to tribalism, so race relations, to put it bluntly, and sexism, and even viewing the non-religious and other groups like gays and homosexuals. We've come quite a long way without, because we've distanced ourselves and decided to take more of a secular look at morality. So I wouldn't necessarily say that, and this is something where I disagree with Molyneux, that without religion, people, atheists just have nothing to turn to. I don't agree with that. I agree that a lot of people do have things to turn to. However, I do agree with the idea that that humans are susceptible to this sort of obsessive, dogmatic application of worldviews, whether it be religious, political, what have you. A good example of this in a non-religious way would be modern intersectional feminism, or even libertarianism kind of has it in a way. Secular humanism, all these different things do have somewhat of a dogmatic view in a way, and you can apply that to anything. I feel that the quote that a good man will do a good thing and a bad man will do a bad thing, but in order to have a good man to do a bad thing, you need religion. I feel that should be amended with just, you need a dogmatic ideology, religion, politics, any sort of worldview where you have a certain set of rules and views on who is good by virtue of rather superficial characteristics and who's bad by rather superficial characteristics, and so on and so forth. Nazism, Marxism, so on and so forth. So I disagree there. I also too, though, I agree 100% in looking up ideas, and I think it's great for people to think philosophically about ethics. I really do commend Stefan Molyneux for the fact that he's made his thoughts aware. He's put them out there, and probably helped a lot of people who were struggling with how to maybe formulate these ideas, or finding a good branch or pathway to follow in finding their own ethical strength. I give him credit and credence for that, because a lot of people probably were lost in such a way, and probably helped develop a good ethical framework by listening to people like Stefan. So I think he very much deserves credit there, and credit just for thinking about that. Again, he and I are actually too different when it comes to how we view ethics in this regard, and I'll get into that later. But I wanted to challenge that. And the other thing I wanted to challenge too, going back to not just Abrahamic religions, a lot of religions have this, but the Abrahamic ones, the ones that the West is very familiar with, all three do have instances where they say that rape and murder and theft and assault are good. So, and it's not just in things like self-defense. They actually have divine commandment in their scripture. So it is really difficult to kind of go from one foot saying, hey, without religion, and pushing people out of the church, we don't have anything, to then say, and we need these, moralities, where it's like, okay, you got to be careful with that. And I know Stefan agrees to a certain point on that, but he does a lot of time, I think, give religion, especially Christianity, a little bit more credit than it's due. I think Christians deserve the credit, not the religion itself. The Christians who throughout life have, throughout time, progressed these ethical views and challenged the more dogmatic stuff, and even challenged scripture in a way. I think those people deserve a lot more credit because they've actually pushed that philosophical questioning about ethics, and they deserve credit, not the religion itself. Anyway, we'll continue with Stefan.
I wanted to work with those sort of four cornerstones of ethics: rape, theft, assault, and murder. And if I could find a way to prove that those are wrong, then, hey, we're on the right path. And this is revolutionary stuff.
So to go there too, I have a similar framework. What I came up to was, what are the two crimes you could commit? And this was more on trying to limit government, actually, and limit law. Because when I was in a more anarchist phase of thinking and becoming more of the kind of minarchist, libertarian that I am now, I thought about that and how a way to say, okay, well, we have laws. Where do we draw the line? A lot of laws are arbitrary, like no gay sex, no pornography, no owning certain guns or having guns, no making more than X without paying X in taxes, no speeding, no prostitution, no gambling, no drinking, all these things that really just don't, there's no real reason other than trying to control people's personal behavior in a way that someone else would arbitrarily say, I don't like that, I don't agree with that kind of behavior, so you can't. How can we find a way that's maybe universal? What would be considered a universal crime? What in nature would other animals consider a crime? And the two that I came up with were any derivative form of theft and any derivative form of assault. And what falls under theft? Well, obviously stealing, identity, fraud would be, robbing people of the truth. Perjury, all of that would be under a form of theft because it is removing something from a situation by force. And then assault, well, what would fall under assault? Obviously, physical assault, rape, murder, battery, property damage, so vandalism. All of those things would fall under assault because it's enforcing violence. It's an act of violence, physical violence, onto another person or an object that is not yours, you don't possess, by force without consent. And that's the other thing too, is theft is doing all of that without consent. So that's the things, is that it's by force without consent. And this is when I was also a lot more closer to the concept. While I never really agreed that taxation is theft, it's more in line with that idea of force, enacting force without consent is the major thing. And that's where in nature, a lot of animals are kind of against that. Not necessarily. There is sort of a way around that where if you, and humans are like this too, where if another animal comes in and challenges and the person accepts the challenge and loses, or the animal accepts the challenge and loses, well then they lose there. And the same comes to where you kill an animal, you have to be willing to defend it from other predators because another predator might try to take it. So it's more of an argument against anarchy itself. But when it comes to having a government, a state, and a social contract applied to it, this is where we want to do that because no one wants to be no one wants to have force enacted upon them without consent. And this is kind of where I come from, and Stefan gets into this a bit too, from a bit of a different perspective, but there are also some issues that I need to kind of break down with that. So we'll go back and give Stefan his due here.
I just wanted to warn you just over the next few minutes. There's an old saying that says, the mind once stretched by a new idea never regains its original shape. This is going to be you in just a few minutes, so brace yourself, be aware, and get ready. So the first question is there even such a thing as universally preferable behavior? Fine question. I'm glad that you rhetorically asked that. The question would be this: can you argue against universally preferable behavior without invoking universally preferable behavior? So universally preferable behavior is things that people do that they ought to do, that they should do. That's universal. Doesn't mean they always will do it. It's universally preferable behavior, not universally preferred behavior. So it doesn't mean that people actually will do these things. It just means that they should do these things. Like if you have diabetes, you should follow a certain health regimen and a certain diet. Doesn't mean you will, but the nutritionist can certainly say you should, based upon the facts at your disposal. So universally preferable behavior is not what people do and that they automatically do things. I mean, there would be no science of nutrition if everything we wanted to eat turned out to be fantastically good for us. We have to go against our instincts and learn more about, health and medicine and nutrition in order to eat wisely, or how to exercise like you want to exercise according to that good old Aristotelian mean. You don't want to exercise so little that you end up as a pear-shaped couch potato, but you don't want to exercise so much that you end up with like shin splints and tendonitis and arthritis in your 50s or something like that. So the question before us is there such a thing as universally preferable behavior? Now, interestingly enough, if you come up to me and you say, as many people have, Steph, you're totally wrong, there's no such thing as universally preferable behavior, what are you actually doing? Well, you're saying, Steph, the statement you're making, that there's such a thing as universally preferable behavior, is false. And truth is infinitely preferable to falsehood, and you should not enact the behavior of saying false things in the world. You see how this works? You cannot oppose universally preferable behavior without invoking universally preferable behavior. You can't say someone is wrong without saying truth is objective. You can't say someone shouldn't say false things without saying that saying true things is infinitely preferable to saying false things. You cannot reject a universal statement without invoking a universal standard.
So, this is one of the big problems I wanted to bring up because I disagree with this entirely. For a couple things. First, when Stefan states that, well, you're saying it's wrong, so what you're saying isn't true, and it's preferable to tell the truth, and da-da-da-da-da-da, that's not the direction. Now, that's a straw man fallacy. You're essentially straw manning the other person who disagrees with you, saying, well, there's no such thing as universal behavior or universal ethics or objective morality, whatever term you want to apply to it. So if you're going to say that, and you're going to say that, well, no, you can't do that, because if you say that it's true and true is universal, then you go into there and you're trying to go into that circular reasoning. It's also, it's circular reasoning. You're begging the question. You're using the fact that you're using your position of, and I know Stefan understands this, I'm explaining it to the audience. You're using your position of universal, well, your conclusion, your position that universal preferable behavior is true. And then you're saying universal preferable behavior is true because people want to seek the truth is universal, therefore universal behavior is true. You're saying that truth is a universal preferred behavior, but you have to prove that the truth is universally preferable. I would say it isn't. And both of us would agree, religious people, they don't care about the truth. They care about what they believe. They care about what, they have many reasons for their faith. Some of them just say, well, I just want to believe what I want to believe. Some of them are just convinced. They grew up and they've culturally become accustomed to it, and they don't want to challenge it. They ignore things. They don't necessarily care about so much what the actual objective truth is, what the empirically provable facts are. What they care about is how they feel. Politically, it's the same way. People who have certain political views, flat earthers, they don't necessarily care about the truth. What they care about is what they believe. And They will listen to anything that agrees with their ideas, but they will not actually take into consideration what challenges it and take the empirical evidence that we can provide as empirical evidence, as, oh, this is true. They only care about seeking what they want to believe. Now, they may think that they're seeking the truth, but there is going to be a bias there, and all humans have that bias. So you have to be careful with that, because everyone has that subjective bias in some way or another, trying to find what they believe is true. Everyone typically is trying to come to a conclusion that is already presupposed. And that's the other thing too, is you're starting to sound a little bit like a religious presuppositionalist with that, and it's a bit bad. The other thing too is when you say, oh, you know, if you're a diabetic, we can tell you what foods to eat or not to eat, and it's like, yes, you can and no. If someone's diabetic, it may not be their diet. It may be that they need to do something to be fit. While you would say, okay, well, that's still something we can empirically show is preferred behavior. Not necessarily, because it all depends on what the outcome they want is. You're saying it's preferred behavior for, you know, to end or manage their diabetes. But if they don't want to end or manage their diabetes, and they would rather be overweight but still be happy eating the foods they want and living the lifestyle they've lived that got them to that point, then is it really universally preferable for them to do that? See, that's where the subjective factor comes in. And that's where, for them, it's what do they consent to and what are you forcing them to do? And that's the difference. And if there is no potential for force or no potential for breaching consent or doing something without consent, then there's no issue. It'd be really, really difficult for a doctor to force a patient, unless like they're unconscious and they have them connected to an IV. But it'd be really difficult for a doctor to force a patient who has maybe moderate diabetes or whatever issue, force them to take treatment under their suggestion. People can refuse treatment. So is it really universally preferred then? They can't force that? No. The doctor could kill a person. The doctor could, you know, maybe refuse to help them, in which case they're then forcing them upon someone who's not consenting to not be helped. But then at the same time, you run the risk there. So it's a bad example, more, I would say. But that's what we're running into. So again, and that's the other thing, is philosophically, you can say you're wrong about UPB. Because philosophically, we can say that there isn't a universal objectivity. There's no objective morality. There's no universally preferred behaviors. Because we can then point, any example you give me, I can point to a counterexample. And you're making the statement that there is universally preferred behavior, in which case then I would have to refute it. So you have to realize you're making the positive claim, the burden of proof is on you to prove it. All I have to do is then point to something that contradicts your concept to then do that. So same thing with religion and certain objective statements or universal statements. Any assertion they make as well. They make an assertion, you can then show a contradictory fact about reality, and thusly the assertion is dismissed. Example, you say it's universally preferred not to murder, assault, thieve, or rape. I can point to countless scriptural examples as well as actual actions where all four actions are approved of within Abrahamic faith and practice with Abrahamic believers. And this is mostly currently Christians in Africa and Muslims across the world. But historically, this has been done by Jews, Christians, Muslims, and all three of their scriptures do, in fact, encourage that. And they have actually had their various states and other forms of government, whether it be tribal or nations, enforce such laws. Same thing with other nations too. Conquering nations have seen it okay that when they conquer a nation, they can then thieve, assault, and rape. And assault often leads to murder anyway, but they can do these things towards the conquered, and that it's not considered bad. While you could then say, well, the people would disagree. A lot of times, what one tribe will do to the other because they've conquered would have been done in return had the shoes been on the other foot. Take a look at Native Americans and their tribes. Take a look at all over Africa. Hell, take a look at what the French and English did to each other for how many centuries, and also Christians and Muslims for how many more during the Crusades. So I wouldn't say that it's universally preferable. And I know you bring up a very, very brief and shallow retort to this. It's definitely a problem with the concept. Again, I do agree with the concept of universal crimes. There are things that can be perceived as universally bad, but that's about it. I would say that's where the line's drawn. But anyway, let's go back to Stefan and give him his due.
So if people say there's no such thing as universally preferable behavior, they've just invoked universally preferable behavior. They're speaking a truth, they're asking other people to not speak falsehoods and so on. So it doesn't work. There's no possible way around this. People have been coming at me with this from 6 million different directions for 10 years or so. You can't get past it. It is an absolute. You cannot argue against universally preferable behavior. So given that there's no conceivable way to argue against universally preferable behavior,
May just go over it like that. Oh my gosh! Again, I agree in concept. Oh, you gotta present it better.
Yeah. The only question that remains, and it's a big one, it's a doozy. The only question that remains is, what is universally preferable behavior? It has to be something, because you can't argue against it without invoking it. So the question is, what is it? A great question. Another great question. So the answer is as follows. In my brief homage to Canadian comedy, just picture, you have in a room 2 guys, Bob and Doug. And you give one of them an iPod, you give one of them an iPad. And you say, guys, we're going to run a little experiment here. Let's run the experiment that theft is universally preferable behavior. Stealing, right, the removal of someone's property against their will. Stealing is universally preferable behavior. Now, go to it. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to snatch each other's stuff. One guy's going to grab the iPad, the other one's going to grab the iPod, then they're going to snatch it back, and they're going to continue to do this until you have pity on them and call a stop to the experiment. Now, clearly, if they're grabbing and stealing from each other all the time, doesn't that strike you as like that can't be a rational course of action? That can't be the morally good thing to do. Here's the thing. Physically, I guess you could do it. You could keep snatching stuff back and forth, but you understand it's kind of weird, kind of exhausting, and you can't really do anything else. Because here's the thing. If you say X is the good, then the opposite of X must be the bad, right? If this is north, the opposite of north must be south. So if you say that the act of stealing is good, then not stealing, right? If you say violating people's property rights must be the good, then respecting people's property rights, i.e. not stealing, must be the bad. Now, if you are napping, you can't be evil. I mean, I go more into why in the free book, freedomainradio.com/free, but if you're having a nap, you can't be evil. You know, parents always say this, you know, kids maybe being a bit of a terror during the day, and then they nap, and it's like, oh, he looks like such an angel when he naps. So you can't be evil when you're sleeping. You can't be evil when you're in a coma. And so if you prescribe a positive action, you must do X, not you should refrain from doing X. Because when you're sleeping, you can be not stealing, right? When you're stealing, you can be not murdering, you can be not assaulting people. And so if you have a positive action as your moral ideal, then when people aren't performing that moral action, they're not being good. So when is the actual act of theft taking place, right? So Bob grabs Doug's iPad. Okay, he's got it. So in the moment that he transferred it, he's good. And then it vanishes because he's holding on to it. Oh no, he's holding on to it. What happens now? Someone's got to steal from him, or he's, like, you understand it. It's a moment that you can be good. Whereas if you have respect for property rights, you can be good at a continual basis until you actually go and steal something, and then you're bad for that moment, right? And then that badness follows you in terms of reparations. So prescribing a positive action as a moral good is significantly problematic. So here's the challenge. Physically, it's very, very difficult to enact thou shalt steal. Stealing is it. But here's an even better part. It is actually, my friends, impossible to achieve. Not just physically. It's impossible to achieve. Let me tell you why. So let's say I have some rusty old garbage bucket of a lawnmower, and I'm like, man, I don't want to trip over this thing. I'm inept mechanically, which I kind of am. And so I just, someone should take this thing away from me. All right. So what I do is I wheel it in its squeaky way up to the sidewalk, and I put a big sign on it saying free, or take me, or I'm yours, or whatever, right? And then you come along in a pickup truck and you are mechanically inclined. I can fix this. Up you, and you drive off, right? Let's say I captured this on video. I got security cameras. And then I call up the cops and I say, someone just stole my lawnmower, right? Now, if they come and investigate, and the guy's going to say, well, here's the it's free sign. I saw it on the sidewalk. And they say, yeah, is this true? And I say, well, yeah, I put it on the sidewalk free, and the guy took it. And it's like, then that's not theft. You're inviting him to take it. It's like, but he took my property. Yes, but not against your will, because you clearly signaled that you didn't want the property anymore. It was open for anyone else to take. So theft can't occur if I want someone to steal from me. If I want someone to take my property, it's not theft. Stealing is not stealing if I want you to take the property, right? So, I mean, just to labor the point, right? You go to garage sales sometimes, I'm sure, and you see, okay, here's a box of free stuff, just free. You don't have to pay it, right? So you can't steal from someone who wants you to take their property. Now, if theft is universally preferable behavior, then Bob wants Doug to take his stuff, and Doug wants Bob to take his stuff. You understand? But because theft is universally preferable, I should want to steal and be stolen from. But if I want to be stolen from, I can't be stolen from. It's not theft if I want someone to take. So theft cannot be universally preferable behavior. Now think of assault. Think of assault. Now, there are situations where I'm going to voluntarily go into an environment knowing I'm going to get hit. I'm not just talking about like wearing a MAGA hat on a leftist campus. I'm talking about like if I go into a boxing ring. Right? If I go into a boxing ring, I'm going to crack and be cracked and punch and be punched. I don't get to call up the cops and say, hey man, someone just assaulted me. It's like, where are you? I'm in a boxing ring. Then hang up. We got busy things to do. So this can even happen like in sports, right? You're playing street hockey. You get a hockey stick to the face. Oh, someone just assaulted me. What were you doing? Playing street hockey. It's like, hey man, that could happen, right? But you go after someone in a mall and you crack him in the face with a hockey stick. Well, that's assault, right? So if you're in a situation where you're either allowing yourself to be hit or accepting the risks of being hit, it can't be assault. It can't be assault if it's voluntary. So it's the same thing with Bob and Doug in the room. Okay, you say to them, okay, enact assault is universally preferable behavior. Well, they're just clawing at each other and beating each other up. But because it's universally preferable behavior, you want to hit and you want to be hit. Because it can't be asymmetrical, right? You can't say it's universal, but each person needs to have opposite desires. One person wants to retain his property, the other person wants to steal it. One person wants property rights, the other person wants to violate property rights. It's no longer universal. You understand? It has to be universal for it to be ethical, or to be philosophical for that matter. Otherwise, it's personal taste or culture or whatever, right? So, as far as assault goes, I guess they could keep pounding on each other, but because they want to hit and be hit, it's no longer assault. Assault is when you don't want to be hit. Rape is when you don't want to have sexual activity performed on you. So this works all along the line. Rape, theft, assault, murder. Not only is it almost impossible to enact them physically on a continual basis, not only does it mean that people who are sleeping are immoral, but it actually destroys the definition of rape, theft, assault, and murder for them to be universally preferable behaviors. This is how we know for sure, 150%, no doubt, no hesitations, rape, theft, assault, and murder cannot be virtuous, cannot be good in any way, shape, or form. See, that wasn't that hard, was it? It's funny, because ethics, there's lots of complicated systems of ethics, but the problem is we really need to be able to explain ethics to like a 2 or 3-year-old. And I went through all this stuff with my daughter using figurines and stuff. I went through all this stuff with my daughter when she was 2.5. She got it, no problem. She's a pretty smart cookie, of course, but it's relatively easy to explain. And I've actually got a podcast called The ABCs of UPB about how to explain this stuff to kids. So,
all right, so we'll give that another pause real quick. So quite a few things again. One thing I wanted to go over is how with Stefan, again, he's bringing up more some of the things I brought up now. Where, first off, he brought up the logical inconsistencies of saying, well, I want to be, you can't have two people in a room stealing from each other and say that, well, theft is universally preferable because theft requires a lack of consent. You cannot be stolen from if you wanted that item to be taken. And we're getting to the point where I believe that what I'm getting at is a bit better than UPB, and I think what it should be is, instead of UPB, it should be UIB, which is universally intolerable behavior. Because we could then say, well, the entire thing that he just gave is still true within the concept of universally intolerable behavior. The thing is, you cannot have universally preferred behavior in certain things that are up for debate. So, when you say that, respecting property rights, well, what are property rights? We disagree on that. You might say that, well, you're disrespecting my property rights when the state collects taxes, or when the state seizes my property because I committed a misdemeanor. You might have a disagreement on that, or when the church demands collection for what's it called? What's the offering they do? You know what I'm talking about, right? When they do the collection, it'll come to me eventually at the end of this. Tithing, that's what it is. Whenever you pay a late fee or a transaction fee or anything like that added on top of something, you could say, well, you're infringing on my property rights by charging me a late fee or sending me the collections and having me pay interest or anything like that, because I understood that it was this way and I don't agree to it, and well, no. You see, that's where there's a fine line. You can't say it's universally preferred to respect property rights, but what you can say it is universally intolerable. It is universally not tolerated to infringe on the agreed upon property rights. It's universally not tolerated to assault someone, to rape someone, to murder, to thieve, to break into a home, to commit fraud, to steal an identity, to destroy property, to vandalize the public square. All of that. You can definitely bring up universal wrongs, but universal rights are a lot difficult. Oughts are a lot more difficult to prove than ought nots. And that, I think, is where myself and Molyneux very much disagree, because ought nots are a lot easier to defend based on examples, but oughts are up for debate more often. And then we run into the issue of, with certain ought nots, or oughts rather, we run into the issue of other things. One thing would be abortion. Whether or not you would state that, well, okay, it's universally, it's not a universally preferable behavior to assault someone. And they would include it. Someone would then put abortion under that. So that's the other thing is assault has a very broad definition, and certain people will disagree on where that goes. So someone will put abortion under there, and someone else won't, and then they would get into a debate on, okay, well, who can receive that? Because we would state that you would say, well, okay, the mother consented to the abortion. Well, the fetus can't consent. And you say, okay, and you bring up that argument, and maybe they say, okay, well, what's the difference between that and when we kill animals? Oh, well, certain animals are protected, other animals can't consent. Okay, well, what's the difference between that and when we, tear down trees or kill plants? Oh, well, that's different. Okay, how? Well, the baby can't consent. Okay, but they're all three living. All three of those things are living. Humans, other animals, and other living organisms like plants. They're not doing something to us that causes detriment to us necessarily, so why are we killing them? Oh, well, You know, we kill animals for sustenance and plants for sustenance and building homes and kill animals for furs and all these different things. It's like, okay, yeah, but they didn't consent to that. We're still committing murder in that sense. Where do you draw the universal line? And not everybody agrees with that. So that's one of the other things, one of the other problems you're going to run into. Now, again, I would state then that, again, it lies with assault and with theft. And abortion is kind of a gray area there. I'm more pro-choice. Excuse me, I'm more pro-choice than anti-abortion. But I'm someone who hopes for the day where abortion is no longer necessary and we have other means to handle the situation. However, it doesn't. I'm a realist, and I know that abortion has a purpose and has a place, and they've been doing it for a long time. Hell, there was even biblical forms of abortion. Traditional Jewish ways of doing it thousands of years ago, and probably other ways in other civilizations as well. So, anyway, getting onto that. But I do agree with the logical concept that consent. We both agree on that. That you can't be stolen from if you want to be stolen. Now, of course, then we run into another potentially logical problem here, which is, okay, say you're presented with a situation where someone threatens you with one form of force against consent to do something else, such as robbing at gunpoint or raping at knife point, something like that, where it's a combination. By, in a way of consenting to the other through that sort of coercion by force, voice crack there, but that coercion by force, does it then breach that? Just for clarification, I think there's a mention of it too briefly, kind of with the whole religious thing too and ideology thing, but we'll get to that in a little bit. It's almost done. A couple more minutes. Let's hear the rest of Molyneux's statements.
We need an ethical system that kids can understand because we don't want them to hit and punch and steal, and right? So it's actually pretty simple, right? I mean, there's a click moment where it takes a little moment to get it, but once you get it, you've got it. And you won't ever unget it, right? Now you know, without the guns of the state being pointed at you, without theological commandments, you know why respecting persons and property are good. And you know why doing the opposite is bad. Now, there will be people who will rape and steal and murder and assault. That will still happen. But here's the problem. The problem, wasp. Well, two wasps, I guess. The problem is that it's not individual criminals who are the problem in society. It is not the thief at night. It's not the mugger. It's not the person who's going to assault you, because you can take reasonable steps to avoid those things. The problem is not individual bad actors. The problem is moral theories that justify either rape or theft or assault or murder. And there are lots of those in the world, all over the place. And you can defend yourself against individual criminals, but those who are pursuing bad ethical theories through the power of the state, through the power of various kinds of compulsion, those people are where the real risk is in society. So there will be individual bad actors. UPB is not going to make everyone good, but it is going to do a full frontal D-Day style assault on irrational, anti-rational, anti-human ethical theories, and that's where the real danger to us and our future lies. So I hope that you will check out the book, freedomainradio.com/free. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Stefan Molyneux. Use our affiliate link if you have some shopping to do at fdrurl.com/Amazon. And don't forget to join our brand spanking new mailing list. New book coming out August 2017, The Art of the Argument. You'll love it. It's great. Have yourself a wonderful day, everyone.
All right, so I wanted to give him that too, just because if I'm using his video, might as well let him do his plug there, just for courtesy's sake. But anyway, at the end there, we kind of come around to an agreement where I agree. You're never going to stop the individual bad actors. You're never going to stop the individual crazy government or the thief, or the serial rapist. You won't, because it's just statistically impossible. No matter how many laws you put down or how well you enforce them, laws are reactionary. Punishments are supposed to be reactionary, not preemptive. So you're never going to you're never going to deter everyone with the threat of repercussion. However, where we both agree on that part, we very much also agree that there are ideologies out there that disagree with all of this. And this is the thing. With this, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I've had this wrong the whole time, and if ever were to be explained to me, hey, this isn't what it's supposed to be, this isn't an argument for objective morality being true, this is an argument for adopting this sort of morality as an implement to government and a social contract, 100% agree with the concept. In fact, we're very similar, and I would agree with the same thing. That's what my view actually is to what I guess you would call universally intolerable behavior, which is this is this is kind of a moral framework to put out there to adopt to kind of get someone else to think about their ethics, especially if they want to move away from theological or political any sort of worldview that has very arbitrary negative views and encourages very aggressive, forceful actions against people against their will for dogmatic reasons, such as killing the LGBT or apostates or atheists or other tribes, other races, subjecting women or subjugating women, all that kind of stuff. So with that, I'm 100% in agreement to adopt something like, UPB, or I have my own view, everything like that. I'm 100% for encouraging people to adopt such views in order to have a better moral framework. And I am 100% in agreement that UPB is a million times better than any moral framework presented by any political or theological moral framework. So it's better than, Marxism, fascism, Nazism, any of the Abrahamic moral systems, just about every, maybe not as, Taoism is pretty good too. I'd say that one's up there, but most, maybe some sorts of Buddhism in certain aspects. But outside of that, yeah, a lot of the moral frameworks have certain problems. There are definitely things that need to be looked at. But yeah, in agreement with that, 100%. But on a philosophical note, to say these are universal, these are objective, that's where I think it's a bit arrogant to look at it that way. Again, I think to look at it as these are universal or objective, these certain situations are universal or objective in certain means, and to also imply one third category, or I guess you'd say third variable for the situation. Not only is it supposed to be by force, not only is it supposed to be against consent, but it's also supposed to be within specific context, or rather, it is appropriate within certain contexts. So, an example, murder. You would say murder or assault. Yeah, they're bad. They are bad within a certain point. In fact, I would say that every single negative action is okay, with the exception of rape. Rape is the only one where there's no contextual allowance for it. Murder, well, if I'm doing it in self-defense, then it's not a problem. Same with assault or any other form of that. Vandalism could be in self-defense as well. If you're driving a car at me, I need to destroy your car, shoot out your wheels or whatever to try to stop you from doing something, or maybe ramming your car with my car if I see that you're trying to hit someone. Theft, there could be arguments for theft in order to survive. There can be arguments there. They're not as strong, obviously, as self-defense when it comes to assault and murder, but there's still an argument there. But rape is the only one, even fraud to a certain point. I'm sure any Holocaust survivors, especially those who had to lie about being Jewish or gay or any of the quote-unquote undesirables for the Germans, of that time, they probably lied to get away, and there's nothing wrong with them lying in order to survive. So that's where there's a little bit leeway there, and that's something that should be addressed too. But to, what I really just don't really agree with is the treating of it as just an open and shut case. I think it's a little bit unfair to just kind of just close it like that and have some of that arrogance, like, see, it's that. And I know you've got a whole book about it, and I think that's wonderful too. It's great to try and do that, especially making it free for people. I think that's wonderful as well. Sharing free knowledge like that is amazing. But again, this is where you can't just be like, oh yeah, it's an open and shut case, and you can't argue against that. It's so philosophically arrogant that I can't help but respond. But anyway, before I go, I do want to see if... Oh my gosh! I have a bunch of people. Let's take a look at all of these. Oh my gosh, we have had all stuff. So, first off, both the Bruce as well as Dave. Hello. Thank you guys for joining. I apologize there. So I'm going to go over some of your guys' stuff anyway. So, on revenge. So, no revenge on towns conquered in Islam. So I do not agree. The opposite of stealing is the negation of the act of stealing, not merely not stealing. I would agree there. The whole idea that not stealing is not the opposite of stealing, but rather charity would be closer to the opposite of stealing, or yes, negating the opposite of stealing, so locking up a valuable. I'm in agreement. And I actually have another point on there. Molyneux, really possibility of two study subjects teaming up to lynch the bastard that put them in this scenario. That's quite funny. UPB, Universal Criterion and Traditional Ethics. Yeah. I like this. Note, he forgot to mention that you can't create arbitrary categories of human beings. Pretty critical element. Yep. I like this. These are good things. Two morals in public life. Force or authority. Agreement. All government is based on moral relativism, which is true. Usually, even if it's democratically elected, usually there's a cultural thing there. So these are very good points. Dave and Bruce are bringing up, and again, welcome. Thank you so much. Saying there is a cause is not the same as saying there's an excuse. Agreed. Let's see here. I think there's more. Why is government moral relativism? Because you cannot have a government unless people believe arbitrary categories of human beings exist and or morality is relative to the individual, which is true. And there, even in majority, it's still moral relativism because majority is not objective. Objectivity, which again, relativism is essentially moral subjectivity. It's based off of all you have to do is show difference in culture and difference in laws between two different countries. A good example is the United States. The different state laws between each of us are morally relative. For gambling being illegal in my state, California, but not being illegal in Nevada, it's morally relative. Californians would say it's immoral because people can become addicted and and can spend their life savings, their mortgage, whatever, on that. And Nevada states, well, the government has no place to tell people what is or isn't. People have the right to do that. There's a business. People can make money doing it. If people find enjoyment from the game, the sport, whatever you want to call it, they're allowed to do that. So that's where government can be morally relative. It's no different than any other sort of arbitrary force. The same thing would come essentially with any deity or god. Gods are morally relative as well because it comes from religions, and essentially it's whatever morality is assigned to them by either the body of people or the individual that created that deity and concept. Again, that's just how I view it, because being an atheist, I don't view deities being real. But anyway, one other thing I wanted to bring up that Dave reminded me with the whole opposite doing, in that a person who's asleep is not technically not committing a crime. they're not technically not evil. It was brought up by Molyneux. I wanted to address it real quick before we go back to make sure there's no other things in the chat there. So when it comes to someone sleeping or in a coma, someone who's not conscious can't be evil. It's not necessarily true. It's that someone who's not conscious cannot be directly evil. They can be indirectly evil or be doing indirectly negative things. What do I mean by that? Well, before I go into a coma or take a nap or go to sleep, I could have set up a bomb to blow up a school full of innocent children. And that could have been timed to go off in 3 days. I get knocked out and put into a coma 2 days later. That bomb is still there. And when that bomb goes off, that is still directly caused by, it's indirectly caused by my direct actions, even though I'm asleep. So I'm still technically evil at that point. I wanted to make that. So before we do that, I'm going to make some quick responses to these. I wanted to say... But yes, going back to it, I'm glad we had both Dave and Bruce checking it out. Again, thank you guys. Thank you everyone who has checked it out afterward, watching these after the fact. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope it was some good food for thought and some good ideas to throw around. Again, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Molyneux for what he's doing. I really do think that putting those ideas out there, especially free, on YouTube and things like that is excellent. It's good to have discussion like this, and to be open for these kinds of discussions. This is how we make better society. These are the steps towards being a more ethical culture, I guess you could say. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Take care, and remember, oh no, what's this? Whole RR stuff. Hold on, let me ask real quick. No, this is interesting. I'm actually subscribed to, but wait, am I still subscribed to Molyneux? Yes, yes. He's almost at 1 million, shit. Because I'm actually subscribed to both Rationality Rules and Molyneux. And what brought me to actually go over this is a video of him and the whole debunking, and that I caught it. And it reminded me of it. I remember UPB from like a long time ago, though. Like I said, I started following Molyneux, oh gosh, dude, like 6, 7 years ago, maybe 8. It was around the same time I found Markiplier. Not that they're related. Not that they're related. Actually, yeah, it was around the same, not too long after I found Markiplier and staunch critic, actually. Because I was both getting back into watching... Because I was getting into SCP. I was getting into... It was the Jurassic Park thing, yeah, and I wanted to watch the Jurassic Park thing, so I found that with the anniversary. So it would have been 2012. 2013, one of those two. And then I was exploring being libertarian. Because I discovered in college that I wasn't really either progressive or conservative. Yeah, Molyneux can be a bit inarticulate, and I don't necessarily fault him as much for that to a certain point, because I feel we're all subject to that. I do feel though sometimes that Molyneux can be a little bit arrogant and hypocritical at times. When it comes to rationality rules, I do feel too that he's kind of started to... He started to kind of, I guess you would say... Ever since he created the game, his own game, which is cool, I feel like he's kind of started to act a bit more like he's an authority on logical fallacies and debunking that, things like that. I don't necessarily agree with him on his disagreements entirely with Molyneux's cases, and then a lot of times I think that he has a bit of flawed views. I know that I probably could have articulated my own positions on this and my disagreements and the flaws I saw with Molyneux's reasoning a little bit better. But I agree, though, that most of the issues I have would be with Molyneux's articulation, or choice, rather, of analogies. I feel like his analogies just aren't necessarily the best. Like the whole thieving one and such, and saying, oh, well, there's no opposite of thieving, or the opposite of thieving is not, you know, it's respecting privacy or property rights and all that other stuff. I do agree that Molyneux could maybe do it better, but I give him credit that it seems some of what he does is off the cuff. With rationality rules, I do feel too that he's kind of, like almost drama profiteering. I wouldn't necessarily manipulation, but definitely that. The whole debunking, you know, Jordan Peterson debunked. He's got like 12 of those or whatever, and a couple of Molyneux ones. And I think it's just because, one, a lot of people who are maybe fans of Molyneux and Peterson would like to see it just to hear the point. Oh, true. Yeah, I 100% agree that taking advice from a relativist is like taking advice. Yeah. I don't necessarily agree with war with relativists unless it comes to that. But I'm not against it if their their relative morality promotes war and they use that to justify an act of violence against them, if that makes sense. Pardon the squeaky chair. So if let's just use this as a broad example, not to pick on Islam, but let's say I'm living in Germany or anywhere in Middle Europe or whatever. And oh shit, I dropped my pen. And let's say a rape gang comes out and rapes my sister, and I witness it. I would not be against using violence in the way of self-defense against them. Or if I were a country and I saw that happen, I wouldn't be against an act, more of a police act against the population in that area trying to seek out this. And then, of course, if that was backed by an actual nation, so say similar to the terror, let's say also the terror attacks of 9/11, I wouldn't be against using that as a justification to go to war against Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has a similar relatively fucked up morality, I guess you would say, relative. So based off the concept of moral relativism, who am I to judge? But again, I would argue that killing people because they're different is morally reprehensible, that it is a universal intolerable. So I would be okay with that. I wouldn't necessarily be okay with going to war against moral relativists on that, but again, maybe I understand that you're saying it's more honest than debating, and I agree to a certain point. I don't know. I may have just missed the statement. I apologize if I misconstrued there. I don't mean to imply that you're in favor of war. But yeah. The thing that I always get annoyed with moral relativism is the arguments towards, mostly the arguments that I've seen levied, in, at least where I'm from, being in the U.S., towards the LGBT community, primarily towards gays and acts of violence towards gays simply for being different. As well as more modernly, the what I would say is the Antifa argument, the idea that it's okay to punch someone who you believe supports genocide or violence towards others because you think that. I find that to be reprehensible as well, and it's a form of moral relativism I can't stand for. So I found myself on a few different face to face with a few different people in disagreement there, but oh yeah, no, you could definitely find consistency within moral relativists. Well, I say moral because, well, I guess no. I should be a little careful there because a lot of people who are moral relativists, I guess, the distinct between people who have more relative morality compared to that, yeah. Oh no, yeah, 100%. When it comes to that, Bruce, I agree that a good way to handle crime, especially gang crime, and that would be to try to tackle poverty to a certain point. But um, I know that my view on how to tackle poverty is very different from a lot of those in power, both your typical conservatives as well as a lot of your progressives. Progressives would just tax a lot of people, raise minimum wage, and give money to people. Um, Conservatives would, well, they just continue to lower taxes on the rich and deregulate. I don't necessarily disagree with deregulating, and I don't necessarily disagree with social safety nets, but at the same time, I don't agree with taxing the shit out of the rich or raising things like minimum wage arbitrarily just to pretend you're solving a problem by throwing money at it. I think too, when it comes to poverty, one of the big issues is that we've limited our opportunities for um, entrepreneurship. Anytime you close down a market through prohibition, you end up hurting people who could have not even so much exploited that market, or at least not to use exploit in the typically negative way. Well, yeah, as an anarchist, we would both kind of agree that fewer regulations would then definitely help. And I forgot that. Yeah, you're more of an anarchist. As a minarchist, I would agree with deregulating a lot of things. So legalizing prostitution, even if you have certain minor regulations, I would say look to Nevada. Gambling, legalize that. Legalize a lot of drugs. You'd really help with a lot of crime. Just because you would essentially take the market away. You would take the legal market away. The only thing is, you still have the black market, but if you can take the legal market away and allow it to become competitive, it might be able to compete with the black market. You can compete with the black market, even if it's just, well, the black market's cheaper, but it's so much harder to get, and the risk reward for a lot of people is because the black market's also dangerous. Not only that, are you risking the risk of getting caught by authority, but it's the risk of danger. And you don't know what you're getting. It's not quote-unquote regulated, so you're not necessarily buying a nice batch of cocaine. It could be laced with shit to make it cheaper. You could be buying from a unlicensed sociopath who might be trying to kill you. Not that that doesn't happen or wouldn't happen necessarily outside, but the risk is a lot, the chance is a lot lower and the risk is a lot higher black market. Anyway, going back to the whole concept of consistency within moral relativists, I would definitely say, yeah, that Antifa has a consistent view, and I would definitely agree that, I mean, I'm not as much of a hater on rationality rules. I'm not saying that you're a hater, but I don't 100% disagree with them, but I do feel he's kind of got a little high on himself. And I could be wrong. But I do find it a little annoying. I mean, I like the idea. I like the discussion it causes. I like the fact that we're having two YouTubers have this discussion. It's similar to how I kind of felt about Kent Hovind and Aaron Ra. Even though I find flaws in some of Aaron Ra's views, especially his political views, and some of his philosophical views, I really like Aaron Ra, and I think it's great that Ken Hovind stepped up to the plate and tried, even if I disagree with maybe some of his tactics and some of his arguments, and I think he was maybe a bit manipulative and very obtuse in his discussion. I think it's great that it was done, and that we have that, and that people can view both sides. So, and again, I know I'm more on the whole, well, we're having discussion's great. That's maybe a bit of it's a bit of the Penn Jillette and Sargon fan coming out in me, but that's how I feel. I really like the discussion and that, so I'm glad they're doing that, even with their flaws. And I think that's the whole point of what I'm doing now too. I'm trying to point out the flaws that I see in hopes that maybe other people. Well, I'm never going to change Stefan Molyneux's mind. I mean, it's a near 1 million subscriber YouTuber versus a less than 50. So I don't think that's ever going to happen. But discussions like this, getting people thinking, getting people talking about different things, I think that's the value where it comes from. But no, yeah, back on the whole concept of moral relativism, that's where I think too, it's a little bit of a flaw in the argument, even my own argument of the whole universal intolerable behaviors, because a moral relativist would say, well, like Antifa would say, well, it's intolerable for Nazis to kill people, but or the alt-right or whatever they want to call it, to say that they believe that races should be segregated, but they're okay with committing acts of violence where they would not be okay with acts of violence towards them and for the same purposes, nor would they be okay with being deplatformed in the same way for similar reasons as well. So that kind of throws a bit of a wrench into it to a certain way. However, again, the argument spinning back on it would be, well, because they have double standards, the fact that the standard they hold for actions taking towards themselves shows that their own negative actions would be perceived as negative if done, if reciprocated, shows that there's a bit of a universal or objective element to those concepts. Just to bring it back, but anyway. I wanted to thank you both again, Bruce and Dave. I don't know, Dave, if I think, yeah, you've come on to a few of these before. And Bruce, always nice to see you again. I hope you're doing well. Thank you both for watching. And thank everyone else who's watching this afterward or watched before. I'll be doing more and more live streams. Gonna get back into this. I've been doing gaming way too much. I need to get off my fat ass and do politics and that again. Thanks again. Check out Stefan Molyneux if you haven't. Check out all this other stuff that we've talked about. Again, start the conversation. Comment. Host your own YouTube stuff. And always remember to use your brain. Take care.